Be seated, and our scripture reading this morning is found in your bulletin again, Mark 10. Jesus then left that place, and he went into the region of Judea across the Jordan. And again, crowds of people came to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. Some Pharisees came, and they tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" "What did Moses command you?" he replied. They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law," Jesus replied. "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so that they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. He answered, "Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery." How many of you have been watching the political debates? Nobody? A few of you have. Have you noticed that the people who are the moderators, I guess that's what they call them, they have gotcha questions where they try to ask the candidate something that will make them stumble and make a mistake? That's not new. That's what's happening here in this particular story. The interesting thing that I find here is that Jesus is questioned about divorce. But it's not so much the fact that he's questioned about the divorce that is interesting. It's when and where he is questioned about this that we oftentimes skip. And that Jesus is in Capernaum. He's now starting his journey towards Jerusalem. He is back in the territory of Herod Antipas. And I think that divorce in our day is a very troubling, painful, controversial subject. The same was true in Jesus' day. This was a difficult subject, and so it's not surprising that the Pharisees and scribes would want to know where Jesus stands on the issue. But where they ask him the question is when he is in the midst of Herod Antipas' territory. Now, to give you some background on this, you remember John the Baptist? John the Baptist questioned or challenged Herod on his divorce and his marriage to Herodias. And you know what that got him? He lost his head over that. And so now they're asking Jesus the exact same question. Are you going to say something that's going to really upset Herod and Herodias? Are you going to condemn him for, what he did with his divorce? And so it's a gotcha question. Because no matter how Jesus answers this thing, it's going to get him into hot water one way or another. Today, when people ask me, or they ask other clergy about divorce, what we're usually looking for is a loophole. We're wanting to know, when can I get a divorce? Or when can my child get a divorce? Because it's a painful and difficult situation. There were two schools of thought in Jesus' day. You had the conservative school, which was by a rabbi by the name of Gamaliel, who said that there's only two reasons when a man can divorce his wife. He can divorce her if she's unfaithful, and he can divorce her if she's barren, so that he can marry somebody else who can keep the family line and the inheritance going. The liberal school, which won out in Jesus' day, said that you can give your wife a certificate of divorce if she in any way displeases you. If she burns the toast in the morning, that's grounds for divorce. In our society today, you have conservatives and you have progressives on the issue. Some who say that you can't ever divorce except for unfaithfulness or abuse or desertion. And others who say, it's the lesser of two evils. If you guys can't get along with each other anymore, go ahead and part and don't bother trying to make things work out. Well, when Jesus was asked about this question, He's dealing with a culture in which only men could file for divorce and not women. And so a certificate of divorce was just simply a way for the guy to get out of a situation that he didn't want to be in anymore. And the certificate of divorce was his way of announcing to his wife that she's an ex-wife now. They didn't go to court. It's just hand her the sheet of paper and you're done. But it would also allow her to remarry then, provided she kept the paper, because if she didn't keep the paper, then she would be guilty of adultery or being unfaithful, because she would still be considered to be married to her first husband. And so it was not a good situation. And Jesus realizes this, and he realizes that he is being a gotcha question here, is what they're trying to do to him. And so Jesus' response is he doesn't take a side. He doesn't say that, well, we need to, listen to what Gamaliel said, we need to listen to what the liberal school says, because they're looking for loopholes. And Jesus instead goes to the heart of the matter, the spiritual side of it. And he says, you're, basically reading between the lines, he says, you're looking for loopholes. But that's not the way it was in the beginning. He says, God created human beings in his image, and he created them male and female. He put his character, his qualities, in two different genders, which is why there is an attraction between the two genders. And so he says a man is going to leave his home, and the woman is going to leave her home. And in the King James and the New Revised Standard, it says, and they're going to cleave. And so you leave, and you cleave, and you become one flesh. And what God has joined together, let no one split asunder. And so Jesus is looking at the spiritual side as to how what God created for a marriage. That great philosopher Rocky Balboa, in the first movie Rocky with Yo Adrian. You remember Paulie was Adrian's brother, and Paulie wants to know what Rocky sees in Adrian. He goes, Yo, Rocky, what do you see in my sister Adrian? And he says, gaps. And Paulie goes, what? He says, gaps. I've got gaps. She's got gaps. Together, we fill each other's gaps. Rocky didn't realize that he was saying something extremely spiritual at that point. That's what Jesus is telling us, is that we have gaps, and what marriage is designed to do is to close the gaps and to recreate the image of God that was given to humanity. So, how does this happen? This is the fun part of the sermon. Is that there's a book by a guy by the name of Desmond Morse that if any of you in the 70s and 80s and 90s took an anthropology course, you probably heard of this book if you didn't have to read it. Desmond Morse was an anthropologist who studied the great apes, and then he thought that he would take his research methodology and use it to study what he called the naked ape, which is human beings, how they come together to have a relationship that lasts. My seminary instructor that I sat under, Dr. Donald Joy, took Desmond Morse's research and applied the scriptures to it and what Jesus says about marriage. And so he wrote a book which is called Pair Bonding, Relationships in the Image of God. What he's doing in this book is he's answering the question is, how does the man on the left and the woman on the right, who come from separate families, from separate homes, separate backgrounds, how do they start apart from each other? And what is the process that brings them together to where they are the one flesh? Because Jesus says they leave, they cleave, and they become one flesh. There's 12 steps that we go through to have a healthy relationship that lasts. The first one is eye to body. Now, one of the biggest fears that junior hires have is that God's going to make them marry somebody who's unattractive. Remember that? What if God makes me marry somebody who I am not attracted to? It's not going to happen. The first stage of bonding is that the young man will look at this young lady and he'll go, hubba, hubba, hubba. And the young girl will see that young man and she'll go, he's not bad looking, he's kind of cute. And so there's this first initial attraction that you see that person and you think, yeah, I think I could stand being with them. If there's no physical attraction at the start, nothing ever happens. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So the next step then is you get eye to eye. And what happens here is that the young guy looks over and he sees that young woman over there, and she glances over and she sees him, and their eyes meet for that split second, and then you immediately look away. It's like, oh my gosh, she saw me noticing her. Oh my gosh, he saw me checking him out. and there's the connection, it's electric. It's like looking in a keyhole and seeing another eyeball looking out. It's overwhelming. And so there is an immediate blowing of the circuit, and you can't make that connection anymore. But what happens now is that you've been found out. You know that you're interested, and so now you have to do something about it if you want the relationship to continue. And so the third step then is you get voice to voice. Now with internet dating and cell phones and textings and all of this stuff, this has kind of been changed a little bit from in the 70s and 80s, but you still have to have this voice-to-voice connection that takes place, which means that you actually have to talk to each other, not text. You have to talk to them. Now, the problem is that in our culture, who's the person who's usually given the responsibility to initiate the first conversation? The guys. Who are the most tongue-tied and the ill-equipped to carry on and to start that initial conversation? That's why guys have these terribly lame pickup lines. You must be tired. Why would I be tired? Because you've been running through my mind all day. Lame. But guys are hopeless as to how to start that conversation. But they need to. And so the conversation starts, and what happens here then is you begin to actually imprint your voices on each other's ears. Penguins. You ever saw the movie The Great March? Penguins? They take off and then they come back and they find their partner by voice. So here you got a gazillion penguins on this rookery. They walk miles and they find their spouse by listening, by hearing their voice. Human beings do the same thing. Our hearing is not quite as acute as a penguin's is, but you know your spouse's voice. You can be in a very busy shopping mall, not know that your spouse is there, hear him or her talking to somebody, can't see them, and you'll go, Linda's there. There she is. And you'll find her. You do it with your kids. You ever notice that when a kid says, Mom, well, 10 ladies will turn to the voice, but one of them is always that kid's mom. We ingrain each other's voices on our ears. This is all part of that leaving stage. Now, during this voice-to-voice time, if you were to transcribe everything that's being said between the couple, it would fill this book. But as far as what they said that was actually relevant information, it'd be about a half a page. It's just verbiage, which is being passed, but it is essential to the relationship. So then the next step is you start to, it sounds like combat now, hand to hand. You start to have your first physical contact with each other. It is absolutely amazing how much information can be passed through 2 square inches of skin on your hands. Now, at least when I was growing up, the big deal was roller skating parties. You guys do those? And why did you go to roller skating parties? Couple skate, right? Boy-girl skate. And so you would make arrangements, to meet the girl you were interested in or the boy you were interested in. You going to the skating party? Yeah, I'm going to the skating party. And your hand felt like a sponge, didn't it? I mean, it was just you could turn your hand up, and you could almost see the water dripping off of your hand. Which is why the guys always wanted to be on the inside of the circle, because your hands were so slippery that if you lost grip and one of them crashed into the wall, you wanted it to be the girl and not you. But you would hold hands. And that's a playful stage where you swing hands, and what you're starting to communicate is we like each other. And it starts to send a signal to everybody else that they're starting to become a couple. This is that leaving stage. You're leaving your family, you're leaving your friends, and you're starting to bond and form a relationship with this other person. Well, things start to escalate a little bit now, and that the next step is you get arm to shoulder. Now, again, this is one of those lame things that is genetically ingrained in men. And that what will happen is you'll be sitting in a movie theater or at McDonald's in a booth so that you can be seated beside each other, and all of a sudden the guy gets tired and he has to yawn. Oh. And he puts his arm around her shoulder. Now, if she snuggles up, you're cooking on gas. Things are moving, okay? If she shrugs you off, that's it. The relationship's done. It's not going to go any further. You guys are all chuckling like you've seen this or done this. And it's important, though, because the amount of skin contact has increased. It's gone from the hand to the side and to the arm. And it's almost like you have it gets very choreographed in that when you walk down the street, you walk with each other, and when you go through a door, you kind of, you have to make it so that you can get through the door the same way, and you want to sit in a booth, so you can sit beside each other, and so you have to kind of slide in together and slide out together, and you guys are you're attached at the hip. And what this stage says to everybody else is, we are a couple now, which means if you're going to invite me, it means Linda's going to come. If you invite Linda, I'm going to show up because we are together. And so this is that arm to shoulder stage. And then this is the most critical stage according to Dr. Don Joy. The arm to waist stage. And these are just markers, by the way. You have the relationship is progressing, and these are just markers as to how you can identify what's happening with the couple. With arm to waist, the arm goes from around the shoulder to it goes around the waist. If you see people from the back, you see the X. In high school, it's where he has his hand in her back pocket, and she has her little finger wrapped in his belt loop on the back of his pants. But notice what's happened to the faces throughout the whole thing, because that's what's key. Is when you're hand to hand, your faces are like this. You don't look at each other. It's you're swinging and you're concerned about how sweaty your hand is and whether you smell bad, and you're embarrassed all the time. When you get to the arm to shoulder stage, your faces are straight ahead and you're looking at each other through the side all the time. When you get to the arm to the waist, your faces are this way. You're both looking in, and it's like there is a funnel or a box. This is the most critical stage because this is when you begin to share your heart with that person. You tell them things that your mom doesn't even know about you. Tell them what's in your secret drawer. You tell them what your plans and your dreams are for your life. Now, if you don't have anything to share, to put into this funnel, this box, the relationship will just fall apart. And it's the last safe jump-off point because you don't hurt each other at this point. You're just good friends. Now, speaking to the parents, okay? Especially if you have parents of junior high, high school age. One of the things that happens when you are a parent is you are given a gift which is called jerkdar. That's where you know if your son or daughter is dating somebody who's a jerk. Okay? You just know. You don't know how you know, you just know. When that happens, what's your initial reaction? I forbid you to see that young man. He's not good for you. I forbid you to see that young lady, because if you see her, it's just going to learn, it's just going to go into trouble. You know, starts with a capital T and that rhymes with P. That's, and you just, and so you literally try to prevent them from being with each other. That is exactly the wrong thing to do, because you are giving them something to put into this funnel that wasn't there. Our parents don't like us. It's us against the world. That, by the way, is actually the plot behind Romeo and Juliet. Two families don't get together, don't get along, mismatched lovers, and because the parents are trying to drive them apart, and instead drives the two lovers together, and you have a tragic end, somebody dies. Romeo and Juliet. What's the solution? Solution is you can have that talk once or twice with your son or daughter, telling them there's something about this kid that it just doesn't feel right with me. Then you got to shut up. But the next thing you do is you say, okay, if you're interested in this kid, then you bring him along. When we go shopping together, you bring him along, because if he won your heart, then he's going to have to win our heart. Or if she won your heart, then she needs to win our heart. And what will happen is you diffuse the whole situation, and then if there is something there, he or she will win your heart. But if there's nothing there, they'll just split apart, provided that they haven't jumped steps. Arm to waist. One more story that I want to share with you about arm to waist. There was an elderly couple that were getting ready to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. And so the kids all got together and they wanted to plan this big event. And so the wife went out and bought a gold watch for her husband, golden wedding anniversary. And the husband couldn't think of anything to get his wife. Nothing seemed right. I mean, he could have got the gold earrings and that sort of thing, but it just wasn't what he wanted. And so he would go shopping with the grandkids. They would, they'd take Grandpa, and they'd go different places, and they would look at things. They'd look at jewelry and flowers and all this stuff, and he would never get anything, and the grandkids started getting really worried because the event was coming up soon. They were going to redo their marriage vows at the church and then have this big reception. And the kids were thinking that maybe Grandpa had gone senile and he just lost it, couldn't get it together. So finally, the day of the anniversary celebration, he knew what he was going to do. And so he took a couple of the grandkids with him, and they went to the grocery store, of all places. And he's on a mission. He knows what he's going to do. And he goes to the produce section, and he starts looking for apples. And he buys 6 apples, puts them in a box, and wraps them up and puts a bow on it. And the kids are thinking, oh, he's lost it. I mean, he's going to break Grandma's heart. She's going to cry when he sees this. They get to the reception, or they do the wedding vows again. They get to the reception. He opens up the gold watch. Everybody oohs and ahs. Grandma, you rock. You're the bomb. And then he hands her this box of apples, and she opens them up, and she starts crying. And the grandkids are going, I knew it. Made her cry. And then they realized that it was tears of joy. And so they said, what's going on here? So they told the story. They said that when we got into this stage in our relationship, we knew that we were going to get married. We didn't know when. We just knew that we were going to get married. We went on a picnic together, and all we could afford to take was 6 apples. What he was telling her is, if I had it to do all over again, I would. If you have that in your relationship, it will last. It'll last through the death of a child or a suicide. It'll last through sickness and illness. It'll last through cancer. It'll last through anything that life can throw at you, because you have a bond there where you have poured your lives into each other. The next step then is face to face. Faces have gone from this to this to this, now this. What happens here is that, and it's a magic moment, is that you look into that person's eyes and they look back, and you can't tear your eyes apart from each other. You just stare in each other's eyes. Lots of couples can remember exactly when this happened. Linda and I can tell you to the day when it happened. We were sitting at our house, my house, watching a stupid movie called Iceman. And we looked in each other's eyes and we couldn't look away. And because I had taken this course from Dr. Joy, I was thinking to myself, I'm doomed. Because I know what this means, that this is who I'm going to marry. Now, it's during the voice-to-voice stage where if you transcribe everything that you say, it fills a book, and what's actually pertinent, fills half a page. At this stage, you don't even have to say anything. You just look at them, and you can see the Encyclopedia Britannica moving between their eyes as they're able to communicate non-verbally. You just know what your person is thinking and what they're feeling. This is the cleave stage. You leave and you cleave. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on the next stages. They move very quickly. Dr. Don Joy headlines these stages by saying, "Get me to the church on time." Because what happens here is that when your spirits cleave, the body wants to soon follow. And so you end up getting hand to body, you get hand to head. Oh, backing up one on face to face. This is where kissing should begin. In our society today, though, when do you get your first kiss? Way down at the bottom, because it's a conquest. Yes. Kissing should not happen until you can actually look somebody in the eye and know where you're aiming. And a kiss is an incredible means of communicating trust. So you get hand to head, you get hand to body. I don't need to go to the rest of those. You just have increased physical contact, and then very quickly you can arrive at the one flesh. And it's difficult not to go all the way unless very committed and have limits on that, and which is why Dr. Joy and why I am not a fan of long engagements. If you're bonding, then pull the trigger and get married. Don't be engaged for 12 months or 18 months or whatever. And oftentimes the reason why we have long engagements is because of financial considerations. We want you to finish school first, or we need to be able to afford this thing. And that's buying into a pagan mindset. Families can nurture college-age kids. If you're going to pay for your kid to go to college, then you pay for your kid to go to college even if they're married. You don't make them choose between marriage or going to college, because all you're going to do is force them to start living together. Because the body's going to follow what the spirit or soul is already telling them to do. So don't make it harder. Don't put barriers in front of them. Make it easier. Nurture that relationship so that their relationships will last. Now, sex is a great thing. If you skip the steps, if you go from eye to body, eye to eye, voice to voice, and then you start getting into the heavy petting thing, what will happen is that relationship will not last. It'll tear apart. But it'll be like a divorce, because there is a bonding that has taken place. There is a tearing that takes place. And then what we find that happens is that the next relationship, if you don't give yourself time to heal, you'll go from eye to body, eye to eye, voice to voice, and then you'll go immediately to the last stage where you left off. And then you'll progress from there. That relationship will fall apart. If you don't give yourself time to heal, you'll go eye to eye, you'll go eye to body, eye to eye, voice to voice, and then you'll go to the next step, which means pretty soon you're in a pattern of immorality. Just horrible things that are happening, and you hurt each other, and you hurt yourselves. So this is what marriage is supposed to be. This is how God designed us. So the most important thing is to have that cleaving stage, because that's what allows the one flesh stage to be fantastic. Because without it, the one flesh stage, that's the cherry on the top. The ice cream and the whipping cream is the cleaving stage. So what about divorce? Jesus then says a couple of negative things about divorce after he talked about the leave, the cleave, and the one flesh. Now, most of the time, what people are asking me about this is they want to know, are there biblical grounds for divorce? And the truth of the matter is, no, there really aren't. Even unfaithfulness does not demand that you get a divorce. There's the prophet Hosea, whose wife Gomer has children by 2 other men. And yet God tells him to woo your wife back. That's the relationship God has with us. We're the unfaithful ones who run away, and God continues to woo us back. But I don't want to dogpile on you. I don't want you to feel bad or to feel guilty. I know that divorce affects all of our families, and that we have people who've been divorced, and you might be a divorced. Although divorce is never God's plan, it is a fact of our life. Which is why Jesus says Moses gave you that commandment, because we're sinners. We do hurt each other. Sometimes it's the lesser of two evils. And it's just a fact of life. What a divorce is, it's a tragedy. It's a sin, but it's a tragedy. It's not an unforgivable sin. Remarriage is possible. It's not God's will, but it's necessary sometimes. If it's abusive, if it's doing harm, then you need to get out of it. And a second marriage can lead to healing. I don't find anywhere in the scriptures where second marriages are condemned. It's not there. I don't think we need to be condemning people for a second marriage. So here are the implications that I see. I'm going to just very briefly, I've already gone pretty long. The first implication that I see from this and what Jesus' relationship is with women and what we see throughout the entire trajectory of the New Testament is that Jesus elevates the status of women. He's condemning divorce primarily from the fact that because it puts women on such an uneven footing. And so he says, no, you can't be doing that. Husbands are supposed to protect the marriage, which is why he says that if a husband divorces his wife, he's forcing her to commit adultery. You should be protecting that marriage rather than looking for a way to get out of it. He's pointing out that women are co-sharers of the image of God. They are not property. They are your partner. Second, for those of you who are still single, I'm mainly thinking of younger people at this point. But for those of you who are still single but want to get married, wait for the right person. That's the thing that I would urge you. Wait for the right person. Don't skip the steps. Be patient and see where the relationship is going. And if things break apart, they break apart. And if things get together, then they go together. What we need to realize is don't be unequally yoked. Don't be dating non-Christians, because if you don't have that spiritual connection of having the same values and the same interests, that's why eHarmony is so successful, by the way. The computer dating thing is because that survey thing that you take, it's finding compatibility at a spiritual level, not just an interest level. That's why they're so successful in what they're doing. And take your time and find that person, and don't be unequally yoked just because they're good looking or they're exciting, because that's not what's going to keep a marriage together. All of us want to be married for 50 years, right? We all want to make that golden anniversary. Nobody enters into a marriage thinking, 2 or 3 years from now, I'm going to trade her in like I would a new car. Nobody. enters into it like that. If you do, then you're guilty of fraud. Don't be unequally yoked. Go through the steps and to realize that a marriage is actually a three-way partnership. It's that triangle again. You have the couple on down here at the bottom of the triangle. You have God at the top of the triangle. And as you grow closer and closer to God, which is God's plan for your marriage, notice what happens to you, is that you will grow closer and closer to each other as well. That's what God's desire and plan is for our marriages. Secondly, to those of you who are married, you know how you rekindle the flame and how you keep the excitement in your marriage? Is you go back through the steps. Spend a week or two where you hold hands with your wife or your husband, where you sit on the couch and you put your arm around her shoulder. She'll think you're weird for a while, but you do that. Where you talk into that funnel and reshare what's happening in your life. But don't have sex for this week or so. Because you know what will happen? Is that you won't make it the week. You will create such a hunger for each other that it will kickstart that one flesh aspect of your relationship. Because when the hearts bond, I've already said this, right? The body will quickly follow. That's how you kickstart your marriages. Repeat the steps. Don't take your spouse for granted. That's probably the biggest thing that takes the flame out of our marriages is we just get into a routine. We just take our spouse for granted. She's going to be there. He's going to be there. And we let the romance leak away. Those who are divorced or separated, and I just want to emphasize that divorce is not unforgivable. You are not broken. Your marriage may have been broken, but you're not. You can be healed. You can be forgiven. Divorces, very, very, very rarely is there somebody in the divorce who's totally innocent, somebody else who's totally guilty. We are both sinners, and you have been sinned against. So we need to confess, and we need to forgive in order to move past it and to heal. And remarriage is not a sin. We need to learn from our past. What went wrong? What steps did I skip? Where am I at fault? So that my next relationship is not a same song, second verse, but is a new relationship in the image of God. For those who are single and probably won't marry, who I'm thinking about here is a lot of times it's widows and widowers. Although I will also hold out to you that sometimes God has surprises for you. And second marriages after the death of a spouse can be absolutely amazing. For those of you who are single and think you're always going to be single, you are in no way incomplete. Okay? You're not a missing piece. Lastly, and this is for all of us, we need to treat all relationships with integrity because relationships are where we find the image of God. Amen? Let's pray.